What's going on, y'all? I'm KM Best. He's Lamby Series, and we are 8 Cubes coming at you a day early. I'm trying something out this week that involves the tier list being a day late and 8 Cubes being a day early because I want that extra day on weeks where there is a Thursday OTA that really shakes up the meta in order to make sure the tier list is at an optimal place so that we can get the best information to you. However, I think you could very easily view this episode as sort of a tier list preview because a lot of what we're talking about is stuff that's going to inform how that goes. And of course, we're going to start, however, with the new card coming out on Tuesday. That is War Machine, a 4/6 that effectively turns every card in your hand into Jeff the Baby Land Shark the next turn. Now, I am typically someone who has seen this card and I think, okay, that is probably the third strongest card of the season. I had Hope and Mockingbird higher in my original ratings of cards for this season, and I think that is likely to end up being extremely true. What I've also seen is a lot of contrarianism. A lot of people saying, this card is going to suck. This card isn't that good. Lamby, where are you on War Machine?
I'm actually a very big fan of this mechanic from War Machine, whereby you turn everything into a Jeff. You turn Infinite into a Jeff, and also you turn Infinite into a card that's like playable in many decks as well. I know it's gonna sound crazy, or like it's gonna sound like oh my god, here we go again. But I would even just play this in Thanos to like enable me to do more things with the deck. But yeah, so this card really will change the meta to a certain extent. Like these kind of cards move metas, which is like if this card is popular or this card is released, people will naturally play less Professor X. People might even play less Jeff because everything can turn into a Jeff, right? So and also people will possibly experiment with Infinite in more decks just because you can play War Machine on turn 5, 620 wherever on turn 6. And it also makes it easier to combat certain locations. Like people talk about War Machine being the counter to Professor X, but it's also the counter to like the game in general, which is like kilns or like maybe underlooked Crimson Cosmos. Being able to play a 1, 2, or 3 cost card in the Crimson Cosmos is also relatively super relevant. So I think War Machine, given its stat line as a 4/6, which well with Zabu is a 3/6, decent stats, good stats, can be splashed into many decks and might make a difference in like 1 out of 10 games in your like ladder climb, which is a lot, by the way. 1 out of 10 games is a lot. Like it could really matter and get you your 8 cubes because you have access to locations which you cannot access normally. Yeah, so I am actually very excited for this card. I want to play it in like many decks and see what happens. Yeah, so that's my take.
I do kind of worry just because of Thanos card, right? Because everything does, but
Everything is a
also
Thanos card
because
now.
like people talk about like, oh, it'll just be a Thanos card, but I don't think people grasp what they're saying when they say that, which is Thanos is the deck where cards go in,
Yeah.
right? Like Thanos is the Zabu where it's like, oh, every card that comes out just seems to help this deck. It's the mid-range deck, right? That's what Thanos has become. When you look at the other decks in the format, Loki, Destroy, Discard, Phoenix Force, these are synergy decks. They're built on making the specific synergy that the deck is built around as strong as possible, and so generic War Machine probably can't go in them, right? The issue I think with Thanos and War Machine is there's not another like, generic mid-range deck for War Machine to really fit in among like say the top 5 decks in the game right now. That's the only one that's like, "Oh, I would be interested in a generically good card." One thing I am interested in though is Professor X in Thanos is I think a lot of why it's kind of an annoying deck, and B covers a lot of bad matchups. Like Professor X is your best card into Phoenix Force if you're a Thanos deck. Professor X is your best card into Hela a lot of the time. And if you can't play Professor X, those decks, like suddenly Thanos loses the immunity it has to these combo decks. It's no longer a mid-range deck that people can't go over the top of like that. It's just a mid-range deck with all the weaknesses inherent to a mid-range deck. And I think that kind of stuff is going to be the major effect of War Machine,
Yes.
where it's almost like I don't even know if you need to get it to reap the benefits of it
Correct.
because someone else is going to play it, and that's going to make the Thanos players cut Prof X anyway. And that means you're just going to play a deck that loses to Prof X because there's none of it left. And now you're not going to lose to Prof X anymore because it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I kind of want to call it the War Machine effect, which is like what you said is like super relevant, which I've mentioned a few times here and there, which is you don't even actually need to, it's kind of weird. You don't actually need to buy this card on release to see its effect because at the end of the day, the fact that the card exists will disincentivize people from playing a 5-1 because your 5-1 straight up loses to a 4-6 and anything, right? So it's hilarious because obviously content creators will buy the card, but like as a maybe non-content creator or someone with like limited tokens, you will see the war machine effect whether you buy the card or not. So I'm excited to see what happens in the next few days.
It's really interesting because the thing you would buy the card for is countering Professor X. But since that's probably just going to happen in an ambient way, you might not need to buy the card for that, which means we need to figure out how the card stands on its own, right? Like, what is it if you build around War Machine? And I think it's likely that that kind of stuff, it's going to be looked at as not very good for the first few weeks, I think.
Can I
Like,
just throw
that's
one
just
idea
how that
out there
tends to
right
go.
now? I'm just gonna throw one idea out there now. What's a mid-range deck that already runs Infinite and Zabu? It's Black Knight, right?
Yeah, you're talking about Black Knight, yeah.
Yeah. We could just throw the War Machine in there and see what happens. That's what I'm gonna try to do.
That was my pitch when I did the review, right? I was like, all right, the most obvious space for this is Black Knight, right? But it's like, I get that. Is that enough to make Black Knight good? Like, what's going to happen, I worry, is like a lot of stuff where it's like a new card comes out, you revisit an archetype that is honestly already pretty good, and you don't evaluate whether War Machine actually makes it better. You're just like, oh, look at the cool shit this lets me do in this archetype. And it's like, I do have some worries where I think it's probably gonna make that deck some amount better, but most of that's just gonna be because you have a 4/6 you don't hate playing.
Yeah.
Like you're like when you don't have other things to do, you just like play the 4/6 and it's like, yeah, okay, that's cool. Like how much better is this specifically making the deck? I don't know. We'll find out. So I mean, let's talk about it. Thanos took 6 of the 8 spots in your most recent Lamby Open, and I think a lot of people have been acting like the sky is falling since then. And I
Been
guess we're
falling
just
for
at
a
the
while.
point. Yeah, I guess we're just at the point where people are just like way too sick of this guy being good to
Yeah.
even like ask how good he is right now. And I'm willing to buy that, right? Like if it's just like, all right, this is the 4th month. Let's just get rid of him. Let's just disable him. Let's just nuke him. Let's just do something terrible to him. So the premise of this topic is not, what's the best Thanos deck? We'll get to that later. We'll talk about that in a second. The premise of this topic is what do you have to do to this card to make him stop? What
So
is it that you have to do to him to make him stop?
yeah, so I'm gonna like further echo the pitch that I've been pitching for like maybe about a week already, which is like the fact that he's just inevitable, indestructible, the survivor of nerfs and whatsoever. Let's just completely nuke him for a few weeks and see what happens, right? Like I think we should literally go for all stones have no draw except the Mind Stone, and obviously you put the Mind Stone back to 1 cost. So literally only the Mind Stone draws cards and we see what happens. It should have a definite effect. The scary thing is what if it's still not enough? But like I'm pretty sure it will have
I
a
don't think
relevant
there's a
effect.
risk of that.
Yeah.
I think that would kill him
Yeah.
horribly.
But yeah, we should try
So
that. We should try that. We should
that's
try
one
that.
option.
Yes.
I personally think that Thanos right now is getting held together by Mockingbird like duct tape.
Yes.
I think that if you assume that the only concern is balance, the easiest solution to this is just putting some wording on Mockingbird that excludes Infinity Stones. Like when like Mockingbird says like whenever you play a card not drawn from your deck, right? So like it would be cards that are randomly generated by Coulson and Snowguard, those would still count, but drawn generated cards like Infinity Stones or Rocks would not, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is something you can do. I think that the major reasons not to do that are that there are concerns that are more pressing than balance, which is to say you don't want to release a card that tells people, "Hey, look at all the cool stuff you can do with this," and then say, "Accept this thing," right? Because that'll automatically make people feel as though they are being artificially forced to do certain things with that card. It's bad design, and I would understand why they wouldn't want to do that. I get it. However, short of fixing Mockingbird, my worry is that Thanos himself ends up over nerfed, and then we realize Mockingbird is still strong elsewhere, and she gets nerfed a bit, and then it takes even longer for Thanos to ever recover. Do you think there's a possibility of that, or do you think everyone watching will just be like, I don't care if Thanos gets over nerfed?
Honestly, I think the vast majority of people wouldn't mind a complete nuke of the Thanos archetype for now. Like okay, I like the archetype, I like the deck, but I can see why people might want it to like just like not see play for like a foreseeable amount of time. So I'm actually really down for like the complete nuke of the Thanos archetype just to see where we go from there.
I don't think they're down for that, but I'm interested to see what happens
Yeah,
because
but
it's like what it's gonna be like 4 patches running of Thanos nerfs.
yeah,
That's crazy, right?
and it's
That's
still
just
not
like
enough.
it's very much like Loki at this point, where it's just like this guy just keeps coming back. It's just too good,
I think it might be
and
worse, man. I think it might actually be worse.
I mean I think it's related to the Loki thing, where it's
Mhm.
like Loki was the deck that made it look terrible, right? And
Yeah,
so they finally solved Loki, right? And the second they solve Loki, it's like, haha, I was being oppressed by Loki the whole time.
I'm back.
You cannot stop me now. So let's actually talk about Thanos builds, and I'm going to start with the abstract, and then we're going to get more specific. In the abstract, Thanos is mid-range deck now. It is playing like maybe 3/6 drops, and the rest of the cards are just like mid-range cards. We're doing mid-range stuff in our mid-range deck. This is not a deck that is the energy cheat monster that it used to be. I think people still look at it as if it is the same Thanos that it has been. It's not. This is a much more streamlined and mid-rangey Thanos, and I think that's part of its current role in the metagame right now. This is the premier mid-range deck of the format. The comparison you'd want to make is to like Zabu decks. That's what this Thanos deck is right now. It's the dominant Zabu deck of the format. It's playing very aggressively statted 4 costs, called Obsidian. It's playing very aggressively statted free stuff, and it's playing big guys on the top end. That's what it's doing right now. And I think that has come with a not necessarily lack of understanding of how to combat it, but the fact is that Thanos gets to be well rounded enough because of Professor X and Eliath that it can just be the best deck at a bunch of stuff. And beating it specifically with Prof X and Eliath in its arsenal, like this is a card, this is a deck that runs Prof X, Eliath, Mobius, Shang-Chi. It's hard to come up with something that beats a mid-range deck that can afford to do all that. And that is sort of the fundamental problem that Thanos is throwing at the metagame right now.
Yeah, that just really hits the nail on the head because in my personal testing and playing like any the combinations of like you said Mobius, Profex and Alive just has total coverage of the meta game. Like you run mid range cards with stats, then you run game enders like Prof and Alive, like and it all actually fits in very naturally, right? So I feel like Thanos is one of those decks that like it has certain level of flex spots, but it always comes back down to like running mid-range stuff into like game ending like consequences, aka like Alive. I have seen people experimenting with like the Magneto slot is sometimes something else. Sometimes you get a Loki in
Yes.
there. I personally am a very big fan of Magneto in like the current meta. Turn 5 Magneto with Hope is always very strong. So I'm a big fan of that. I have also seen people cutting Cow Obsidian a little bit here and there, simply because the breakdown that I think is what's happening is that because in the mirror match, Cow Obsidian is like realistically the only thing that gets Shang-Chi on curve, and you're basically giving them a Shang-Chi target by playing a cow early. So omitting the cow obsidian lets you not gives them a dead card essentially. But for the most part, I'm not really with that line of thought because I feel like in cow obsidian in many other matchups is just too strong, right? Like you get to play it on turn 3 if you Psylocke. You get to play it like just on curve and into like the prof on that location or like just a vision and then you have mobility. Yeah, so I am a cow obsidian fan. And I know that some people are not, but yeah, these are the main flag spots that I see. Oh, one more thing I want to mention, the Psylocke thing. We talked about it in like one of the my previous episode. Psylocke is so core right now. Like the second dinner nerf that they did to it, changing it to a 2-1 was so smart. Like I have tried cutting this card because it's a 2-1, but every time I cut it, I'm like, oh, I wish I had it. Almost every scenario. And this was a smart nerf really because it felt like a flex spot now because it's a 2-1, but now it feels like it's a mandatory 2-1, which is quite
Mhm.
smart.
Let's talk about a couple other decks. The way I see the metagame right now is there's basically like 5 decks that I see with any kind of regularity. It's Thanos, of course, Loki, discard, makes sense, right? Phoenix Force, probably the best combo deck. We'll get to that one in a bit. And also just destroy. And I gotta say, I've been unbelievably impressed with Destroy. Like, I played it for like 10 games and just didn't lose. And it was just like, wait, what's going on right now? Like, why Destroy? Why now? And I think there is something to be said for the fact that, like, as Thanos becomes more of a mid-range deck, as it becomes something that is more built around like these weird like interactive plays, like as it gets a little bit smaller, suddenly decks have more room to go over the top. And this applies to both discard and destroy, where it's just like this is a deck that previously was going extremely tall and now and also extremely reliably like turn 4 Professor Xing with old time stone lockjaw stuff, like not either going very tall or going to prevent you from getting very tall with a lot more reliability than it currently has. And I think there is just room for these like, combo synergy point decks where it's just like here's just a bunch of numbers. Good luck. Like and that feels like a lot of why I had success with Destroy. But also it's just like, you know what? It turns out what's really good against a lot of stuff right now is just a bunch of hard to properly interact with snowballing power. And that applies to, a lot of decks right now because you'd be surprised, but I think this is actually probably the nadir of interaction in Marvel Snap. Thanos is the mid-range deck, right? It has these interactive tools. There's no Sarah running around with like, enchantresses in it. That's just not a thing. The most you'll see in any deck is like Loki with maybe a rogue and a Shang-Chi, right? But there's no like super tech deck running out there right now. Discard has no tech whatsoever. Destroy has like one tech spot. I was playing a Shang-Chi in there because, value, right? But it's just this weird spot where like there's just not a lot of tech and you can kind of just build your own sandcastle. People talk about the sandcastle thing like it's a joke, but this is a pretty sandcastle meta.
I just want to add one thing to what you just said. I share most of the same sentiments with regard to Destroy, but one thing I really want to add is that because this I experienced firsthand, and also because from what I've been watching, Thanos now as a more mid-range deck, more than anything else, right? It really, really fears Killmonger. Like Killmonger
Mm-hmm.
versus Thanos
The
is
stones matter. Yeah.
insane. Like so many times, I was casting my tournament recently, and then I saw the power of Killmonger versus Thanos itself. Like Killmonger on curve when you don't have your Mockingbird yet is backbreaking. Killmonger on curve when you are planning to play Cow on 4 is backbreaking. Killmonger on turn 6 plus a death, for example, and whatever other nonsense is like minus 10 stats from the Thanos board because Soulstone is at that point about mostly a 1-5. So like Killmonger stonks super high up right now because Thanos is really just a good stats mid-range deck, and a lot of the stats comes from the curving out of the stones into your stuff. And if the stones get removed, well, you lose a lot of potential to play your stuff, which is like your 0-9 Mockingbird, and you even lose the stats from the stones, which is more than ever super relevant right now. So just want to say that the Killmonger thing has a lot of it going for it right now with Destroy and any deck that actually does run Killmonger.
That's an amazing point. I 100% agree with you there. It's one of the things that I used to think about back in the day where it was like whenever Killmonger was good in the meta, I'd be like, what is the best Killmonger deck? And very often it was Destroy. And it's crazy that that heuristic is coming back now
Mhm.
because the stones actually matter in Thanos because it's a more mid-rangey deck. That power matters. It wins by smaller margins. And because you're trying to cheat out Mockingbird and Cull Obsidian, two incredibly good cards. I wanted to talk about Phoenix Force because I guess two reasons. One is I think it probably already is the best combo deck in the game. It has taken the hella spot to me, where I just think this is like your default combo deck for a variety of reasons. I'll list a couple. The first is just baseline power. Right now, I checked Untapped, and the Phoenix Force deck that I did the highlight video on with Husky, check that out, is a 54% win rate in the top 10% of Infinite. And you're like, okay, 54, what does that mean? For a combo deck, that's very, very high. Like for a combo deck that's like, this is not a deck that does its thing all the time, that is very high. And that is a worrying number, legitimately. And I think that Phoenix Force is like approaching like those are the numbers that Hella tended to have, like an individual Hella deck in top 10% of Infinite. Like that's the kind of stuff we were expecting, and I was like, okay, that's kind of worrying, right? Generally, I would expect combo decks to be significantly lower than that because of the amount of games where they don't work. The fact that we've gotten a deck to get to that point there are enough games where it just does its thing that this is like a positive win rate deck, not just a deck that's positive cube rate. I think that actually is worrying. And frankly, if Professor X goes out in the meta, this is the deck I expect to be the absolute biggest winner from it. So I wanted to cover it in both of those contexts and see what you thought.
Yeah, this deck straight up the winner of the War Machine effect. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like this deck doesn't even need to run the War Machine. But the moment the War Machine releases, Professor X Tongs go down, this deck will just be like, all right, I think most of my games I will not see a prof. I would just go crazy right now.
Yup.
So yeah, I mean, initially when I saw like the builds with the Tribunal on the top as well, I was just like, that doesn't work. But actually, the Tribunal at the top end actually does give the deck a dimension of like accessibility into certain locations that it can't access, or like those early closed off locations that you can't touch anymore. And yes, also Tribunal does beat Professor X. So I've started to pay a bit more attention to these top heavy Phoenix Force decks that are less combo, less like low end wombo combo and more like standard like Shuri Nimrod Bam kind of stuff. So yeah, it's
The Tribunal specifically feels like it's a card they can run because their turns are so empty, if that
yes,
makes sense.
correct. Yeah, it's a
Like
very
it's
empty early
yeah.
game sometimes when you don't draw your cards. You just like go for a half combo and then on ladder one Tribunal that just suddenly beats a prof lane should be enough at times.
Yeah, it's like a card like there's definitely one spot in the deck that I'm not really sure what it's supposed to be. In my current build it's Iron Lad, and it's just
Okay.
like that's just so you can YOLO into the deck looking for like Shuri Nimrod stuff or whatever later in the game. But I understand the Tribunal people and I get what they're cooking. It's just not where I'm at with the deck right
Mm.
now. Let's talk about the Thor control deck that Shuri Enjoyer used. It's so embarrassing for me because I've had that deck for weeks. Like he posted it into our group chat and he was like, "This is a deck I've been crushing with. I got it. I got like it's really good." And I was just like, okay, I totally buy that. I'll get around to play it. And like what I do, my stream process is I pull up like 4 decks that I want to play, and then I just go through them until I find something that's like that I actually like. That's typically how I like start stream is like. And for the last, I would say, week and a half, that deck has been one of those 4 decks, and it just has not made it to stream. And now Shuri Enjoyer has proven me. Cause I was doubting it, right? Like the reason this is embarrassing for me is I was just like, really, do I really buy this? I don't know. I should have bought it. I should have bought it. That's the lesson here. Shuri Enjoyer, he he posted in the same group chat like, I'm so happy I made it to top 4 without dumb shit Thanos.
Yeah, I saw the comment.
Yes. So, Lamby, I mean, this is Sarah, right? This
Yeah.
is this is Sarah. This is a Sarah deck. But if instead of Sarah, we're playing better cards like Thor, Beta Ray Bill, and Jane Foster. So it's Sarah, but we don't have the same weakness to Mobius and Mobius. And that's really the like fundamental thing that's going on here is there's a lot of Mobius in the meta. So instead of playing Sarah, we're playing the Jane Foster stuff because drawing a 0/6 is effectively the same kind of discount as what Sarah would have given you. This is the same logic behind like my old like the idea of just playing Black Bolt Stature in a Sarah deck, where instead of Sarah, where it's just like the discount of that amount of energy, get like a 1/6, get like a 0/6. That's the amount. That's basically the same as the amount of discount Sarah would have given you. So you get to play the same kind of game plan without the same kind of vulnerability. The difference is this lets you play the same kind of game plan and dodge Mobius, and I like that a lot.
Yeah, exactly what I wanted to say as well, which is like this is the Sarah deck that instead of playing like 1/6s, you play 0/1s that turn your other stuff into like +6s or doubles, right?
Yeah.
So and it's sometimes quite immune to Shang as well, because when I saw Shuri Enjoyer play this deck when I was casting my tournament, a lot of the time he didn't have initiative, and like it was so easy to dodge Alioth because all your cards cost so cheap, and you just figure out the Alioth lane and just play your hammers in the lane that's not the Alioth lane, and then everything just gets too big and then you win. So this deck it's interesting because it's actually a very simple concept. You just play stuff on curve mid range, and on your final turn, it's hammers plus tech card. It's just the same. It's just play
Mm-hmm.
stuff on curve and then hammer plus tech card. So simple concept that works out and doesn't really lose to Mobius. Like the Zabu being Mobius, it's not even that essential.
Does not matter.
Yeah, yeah.
What matters is did you play Thor, Bill, Jane? That's
Correct,
what
correct.
matters. Zabu doesn't do anything here.
Once again, I also want to say that, like, from what I've seen and what I've experienced with this style of decks, like sometimes not playing the Jane on 5 is actually even scarier for your opponent, because you don't know if they drew one
Oh, they
hammer,
don't
two
know.
hammer, or no
Yeah.
hammers. And a lot of situations where I saw the deck being played was like, a lot of the times it was like, oh, I lose to one hammer, but if he drew none, I win for sure. If he drew two hammers, I lose for sure. But like, you don't know because no Jane was played. So there's a level of guessing there. And then of course you also need to guess where they're gonna play the End Shank and Shadow King, which kills Blob. So interesting concept deck, which I believe the list will be posted up somewhere. But if not, you can check it out on my Twitter as well. It's on there. Really cool deck. Check it out yourself. It's just basically Sarah that's not playing Sarah.
Yeah, but like that's such a smart thing to do
Yeah.
because right now the gate on Sarah is Mobius, right? The fact that Mobius is everywhere means you just don't want to invest in Sarah. And so having that type of game plan without having to get completely dunked on by Mobius. Like this is what when we talked about Beta Ray Bill when he came out, we were like this is the kind of thing where like if the meta is right, this could actually be the best in slot in some situations, right? Like
Mhm.
this Thor Beta Ray Bill Jane, we talked about how it was being run in like all these various decks and how it was probably like 5% worse than the typical thing that deck was doing, but if the metagame changed, it could be better. And I think this is one of those situations where this is better to do than Sarah. This is actually just better thanks to the metagame context. This actually brings us to our next topic, which is cheating versus stats. And I think this is a topic that people get confused a lot. I think generally, here's my thesis, people overrate energy cheat and underrate stats that are better than they should be, right? And what I mean by this, I think Sarah versus the Jane Foster stuff is a great example, right? When you are cheating stats with Jane Foster stuff, you are getting more value out of that than you would have out of a general Sarah. Like the Sarah is getting you X amount of power for Y amount of input. The Jane Foster stuff is getting you a higher amount of power for roughly the same amount of input, right? And I think a lot of stuff is evaluated incorrectly on the basis of energy cheat is always broken, but people don't seem to realize that the reason energy cheat is broken is because of the ratio of input to output, right? You're getting something for less than what you should be paying for. But on the other side of the coin, there are cards that give stats, which give the cards you're playing more than they should have for what they cost normally. And I think my examples here are going to be Silver Surfer and Elsa Bloodstone, especially original Elsa Bloodstone. Original Silver Surfer, we have this from the devs. When Silver Surfer was a 3-0 that gave +3, this was when Zabu was out, Silver Surfer was the better deck. They said it had an internal win rate of about 60%, which is unprecedented because when you look at a tracker, that's all the people who are uploading their data. They're more oriented towards winning. There's an inherent upward bias in that. As far as we know, on their internal data, no deck has ever been as high as that Silver Surfer deck. And yet, when people talk about that metagame, they talk about Zabu. They say it was the Zabu meta. Zabu was so good. Similarly, Elsa Bloodstone and Loki. When Elsa Bloodstone came out, she was so good, she relegated Loki to being second fiddle in his own deck. Loki was basically there in order to get further Elsa Bloodstones. That was the whole point of the card. Elsa Bloodstone was so good, you wanted two of them, and that would be how you won. And people still remember that as the Loki issue. And I just wanted to bring that up because I think this is a constant thing that happens is people think about how broken it is when you get stuff for cheaper, and that for some reason tracks to our lizard brains as more broken than getting a big thing for less than you should be paying for it. But it's like, look at Call Obsidian, right? Look at Blob, right? Like sometimes the number on the right side of the card matters more than the number on the left side of the card. Like people focus on the number on the left side of the card, I think a little bit too much, and it leads to, I would say, potentially misleading conclusions.
Yeah, I want to talk about just at one point, which is instead of just energy cheating, which is also like ramping, which is like what's very
Yes.
relevant right now, which is Hope Summers, right? So I've seen a lot of like, okay, so there's this thing with Hope Summers whereby when you play her, you really want to get value out of her energy, right? But like you also need to realize that playing Marvel Snap and playing your cards in the right places is also way more important than just getting the energy, because many times I've seen players go up to like 8 or even 9 energy with Hope Summers on turn 6, and their deck doesn't support the combinations of cards that you could use to abuse the energy, and then you just get blown out because you didn't play your cards in the right places, which you would have done if you didn't like tunnel vision on trying to get energy with Hope Summers. Like, let's just talk about the Thanos deck, for example. Like, Thanos is traditionally on turn 6 you play a 6, right? So usually what happens is on turn 6, 6+1 is all you need. Basically, a big 6 cost card and a stone. It's enough. Like, you don't need to go to 8, 9 energy, because the pairings of like 6 plus something else doesn't really happen that easily. And like, one of the best pairings of 8 energy is specifically like Shang-Chi Cow Obsidian. And if you don't really have that option available to you, you don't really need 8 energy. So just think of like energy cheat or like ramping and like getting extra of these energy as like, it's got to be relevant to your situation and your deck, because you don't just do it just cause whoa, more energy, great. You need to know if you can even use the spare energy, right? If your hand is like, if you like played 5 stones on the board, you have all 6s in your hand, do you really need 8 energy? Like, what are you gonna do with that? Like, you don't. So like, just play the cards in the right places and don't get Professor X out of the game, you know? That's what I'm trying to say.
Final topic is something that I think a little bit more of a theory topic, right? What we're going to talk about is how in other card games, typically what denotes skill is your ability to take a 90-10 situation, play to your outs, and still win it. In Marvel Snap, what denotes skill is your ability to take a 90-10 situation, get snapped, and leave without listening to that little voice in your head that is telling you you have outs to win this game. Lamby, you're someone who was known for doing this in other games, right? Like playing to your outs, do things like that. That's what being a Hearthstone Grandmaster is to some degree. And I want to know how you turn off that voice in your brain that says, "No, you can still win this."
Okay, so this is a very close to my heart topic and super interesting one. So when he brought this up, I was like, okay, this is good. So the first most important thing I think when you need to realize Marvel Snap is compared to other card games is Marvel Snap is like the only online card game to my knowledge that gives you the option to be incentivized to lose. You know, like you're incentivized to lose less. I think it's a very important hallmark of the game, which is like losing less is sort of winning, and you need to know when you need to lose less. So I think the first thing to understand and to shut off this like I must try to win mentalities, you must accept that losing less is a W, because people don't seem to realize this enough yet. But if you can accept mentally that losing less is a win, you will be more willing to retreat when you know that you just cannot win, or like your outs are like 1 out of 10 chance, you know. But of course I do need to address that whole like playing to your outs thing, because in like conquest and tournaments, that's like the one
Yes.
time, that's like really the one time. Because if you're ladder grinding, you really don't need to let curiosity kill the cat. Just leave. Just like go next and like fight the battle against the pumper. But in tournaments, I would say certain situations where you cannot retreat, yeah, then you turn back on your I need to try and figure out how to win brain. But other than that, a lot of the time in Marvel Snap, the most winning things you can do is knowing that winning equals losing less. So yeah, that's what I used to do to remind myself.
Winning equals losing less. And on that bombshell, it's time to end. Thank you so much for watching this one day early episode of 8 Cubes. Thank you so much, Lamby, for recording it early. And as always, I've been KM Best. You've been phenomenal. Lamby, take us out.
Thank you so much for being here once again. The next episode will be on my channel. If you like what you see, comment, subscribe, say something nice, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.